Well, hello, everybody. Let me share this to the group now. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Virtual Thursday's Dire Literary Series. And tonight, my guest is Susan Zalkind, and she is the author of The Waltham Murders and has a lot of firsthand experience with this case. It was made into a docuseries, and we'll talk about all of that a little bit later. But let me, if you don't know Susan or anything about the book, let me fill you in right here. Susan Clare Zalkind is an investigative reporter, writer, and producer. She lives in New England and likes to swim in the ocean. She spends more than a decade investigating the September 11th, 2011 murder of Brendan Mess, Raphael Teken, and Erik Weissman in Waltham, and the connection between the officially open homicide case and the Boston Marathon bombing. Her book, The Waltham Murders, One Woman's Pursuit to Expose the Truth Behind a Murder and a National Tragedy, was published this year in March. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate you standing by. This is the first time I've used an image background in a Zoom meeting, so we're already off on a great start.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the book, and we'll talk about. I know that you had trouble the fact that one of these victims, you were an investigative reporter, you were young, and you were looking into something that happened in Waltham. So take me through that a little bit.
Well, yes, I always had an interest in crime, for better or worse. I pursued that interest in my youth, got into a little bit of trouble, but also acquainted myself with a number of marijuana dealers at a time when that was criminalized. I went back to school. I focused on schoolwork. I signed up for the school paper, and eventually I got my foot in the door at a local TV station. And I wouldn't say I was an investigative reporter then. I certainly was aspiring to be. And I was looking into a strange murder in Waltham. This is the Waltham watch factory. 3 men were found with their throats slit. Marijuana was dumped on 2 of the bodies. It was one of the most unusual homicides I'd ever heard of. I started to look into it, and I found out one of the victims was my friend. And that's when, my investigation took a serious turn.
So when that happened, did you dive into the investigation, or did it kind of pull you away when you heard that it was your friend?
There was certainly a push and pull. The interest was certainly there. I was also contending with grief and fear. And as a young journalist, I remained convinced, as I had before I knew that my friend was killed, that this was an important story, that this was unusual. And unfortunately, the same sense of urgency was not reflected in the by law enforcement or the local press. And so at that age, I also started to second guess myself. At the same time, I was contending with grief. And, there is a part of investigating criminal cases or criminal coverage that is exhilarating, right? It's important, it's urgent work. I think people can respond, if somebody works well with high stakes work, there is this part of this work that I enjoy. And after Erik was killed, every news story that crossed the wire about homicide just filled me with absolute dread. But I continued to, ask around. My curiosity wasn't completely distinguished. I worked in academia, but I was still curious, taking notes, interested and confused as to why there wasn't more interest. And yet at the same time, I tried to trust that law enforcement was on the job. Why wouldn't they be?
Now, so why did Waltham, I know the answer to some of these, but just to refresh, inform other people, why do you think that the investigation really did? This is a huge murder. It's a unique murder. You know, there's a little wild effect with the whole marijuana sprinkling. So why was this not investigated?
You also have to remember this was a killing with 3 men whose throats were slit on 9/11/11, which also, at least to those close to the case, struck them as significant. The questions of why wasn't this case thoroughly investigated, those are, one can only assess various theories, right? My reporting details everything that I know about the investigation, including work that investigators did do. And it's shocking to me, the lack of interest in this case. And it raises serious questions. One of the questions is just standard operating procedure in murder investigations on the state level outside of big cities. There's certain questions about collaborations with various departments and areas where there's a lack of oversight, right, in law enforcement. But also the victims were marijuana dealers. They were part of the criminal milieu. And I found that there was an overlap between members of law enforcement in the area and the victims in regards to their involvement in that same criminal milieu. So one theory that I look at in this book is it possible that investigators did not thoroughly look into this case for fear of what it might reveal about their own wrongdoings or the wrongdoings of their colleagues or associates?
So there was some possibly theories, political cover-up. Now, when you further investigated and talked to some of these people, did you get more of a sense of that? Did people try to block you or not necessarily seem willing to give you information?
Certainly. And I would say also that this book is about the facts, right? You can come up with various theories, but the fact of the matter is that this case wasn't thoroughly investigated. And that is something that we've yet to reconcile with, especially for the number of people who are impacted by this crime. It was the Boston Marathon bombing and the local community. So theories, they are important. As an investigator, I certainly entertain them. They direct my work. But at the end of the day, this story is really about creating a record of all of the facts. And so those that are impacted by this case can better inform themselves. And also, so we can study how we seek truth in a post-truth age. This story took place on the first murder was 2011, and the Boston Marathon bombing, and another shooting that was 2013. This was really the dawning of a new age in our use of social media and the spread of dissemination of mistruths. Another thing that I look at is Russian propaganda in this book. So what's really important, the theories highlight, the need for some form of accountability, but this book is really about facts, not theories.
So I'm going to jump away from the case itself and talk to you a little bit about you as a writer. This book had an interesting road to publication because you put out a proposal and then suddenly you're writing and producing the TV series before the book. So it was like propose the book, suddenly you're working on a show, and then the book came out. Do I have that correctly? Was there certain feelings around the order of that, or?
Certainly. No, that's about right.
So
I'm driven as a journalist. I'm driven by accountability and impact, right? Especially when you're dealing with a case like this, where you're communicating with the victims' families at length and people who are really directly impacted by what happened. So at every step of the way, I did have that impact in what is the ethical thing to do for the journalism, right? And I say that not to pat myself on the back, but this is heavy material. How does one sleep at night? You don't want to feel like you're doing this work to profit for a reason that doesn't totally fit soundly. And that said, people will be hurt. It's not like I have permission slips from anybody to write this, or I'm doing it for any other reason but the truth. But at the end of the day, you have to feel good about what you're doing. So at every step of this journey, I prioritize the truth, doing the work, funding the work, and getting it out there. At first, that was the magazine story and This American Life. And initially, even before that, I thought I was just going to help out other journalists, like the New York Times. I thought somebody else would be up for the job. I worked for Boston Magazine, This American Life, and I got approached by a book agent who's fantastic. And there were real questions that I knew that the victims' families were still contemplating. The initial reporting launched my career, but I really didn't feel like I was done. And I also thought that we would have answers in the Boston Marathon bombing trial, which I also reported on. And I taught myself to write as best I could. And while reporting on this, and when I sold my book proposal, initially I shut down offers to do the docuseries. I didn't take money for a while because I didn't want it to impact my reporting, right? Or there's not every documentary, it has journalistic integrity, and I'd never made a documentary before. So if I make an agreement of on the record or off the record or whoever I'm speaking to, I wanted to make sure that I had enough control over the documentary to control the integrity of that as well. And I wasn't sure how it would help me do the work. And then I got a call from Matt Cook, who's a screenwriter. He wrote Patriots Day, who I hadn't seen at the time. Our talents actually really complement each other well. But he called me up and had read his memoir writing and dispatches about his experience as a staff sergeant in Iraq. And I was at a point in my investigation where I could really use someone to go knock on doors with me. And he seemed committed to finding answers. And I said, okay, maybe having cameras would be a good thing. And it helped. I was able to do a tremendous amount of reporting that I would not have been able to do on my own. Small part of it appeared in the docuseries, and most of it is in the book.
There was a section of the docuseries that you just became so burned out, withdrawn, needing to step away a little bit. Now, when you were making the series, did any of those feelings seep in, the reliving of the investigation of?
This was very challenging emotionally. And so for me, I really include that sort of processing time as part of my work. At a certain point, I know when I've been burnt out because I make phone calls to people impacted by crime and they don't connect with me. I know that if I'm able to do the work well, be sensitive to it, and also do the work of connecting with other people, I have to swim in the ocean, like I say in my profile. So certainly this was challenging. This was personally very challenging, but I don't think I could look myself in the mirror and call myself a journalist if I didn't see this story to the end. And that's what I did.
So you talked about the truth in journalism. So we've got a question from Robert. During a certain presidency in journalism, there was no news, just opinion editorial claiming to be news. Since Joe Biden became president, where is journalism now? Is it more closely based on fact?
Oh, I would say I'm not sure. I think there's a reckoning about what journalism is, right? And there's certain standards that some organizations meet and others don't. For example, and so that's part of what I assess in the book. I'm critical of the media. And I also look at how others in the media have been misled. I don't say that as clearly in the book, but there's been a huge amount of misreporting on this case, clearly, and directly because of some failures in media. But I think that we're at a changing period. It's not just journalism; it's AI. It's harder and harder to deduce what is real anymore. And that's very challenging and disturbing to me.
Yeah, AI can produce videos. You don't know what's out there and what is real. So
Yeah, I think it's a crisis of reality as much as it is journalism.
tell me about when you were investigating this, the eureka moment when you found out Tamerlan knew your friend and that connection hit. What were you feeling, right? I sound like
I mean, it's like you're asking me, it feels
person.
terrible. Have you ever had a big, horrific, traumatic event happen? It feels like
Right.
that. It becomes a lot more predictable, but it doesn't become easier. You know, even interviews like this, I'm happy to, I don't know what to say. It's very challenging when something like that happens. I've learned to anticipate that and do the work. But yeah, no, this was rough. The book isn't, you know, about all the times I've had to kind of process the horrific events along the way, because I don't know, I do have that ability to jump back pretty quickly, which I don't think a lot of people have. So I feel it all the way. I'm glad I feel it. It informs my investigative report and my connection with everybody involved. But then I am able to, you know, connect with friends and have another part of my life that, I don't know, rejuvenates me, connect with my community.
Now,
This work has really emphasized, I think, the importance of that, the places where I've gone and the, you know, the routines I've developed to just roll the punches. And I think it's important when those events happen, as much as one is able to feel it, to respect the severity, the emotion of the moment, and feel it all the way, and then it's much easier to jump back up.
now, can you manage to give yourself self-praise? For example, like Rachel Maddow gave you the book a wonderful review. Are you allowed to celebrate that? Do you allow yourself to do a little dance about the book, or is that still hard?
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel really good about myself. I feel ethically, I feel really good about this project. I feel really good about the facts. I feel really good about the journalism. And those are choices that I made. Certainly this work, you know, if you're working on material that is so high stakes all the time, that is that moment where you can get down on yourself almost as a measure of self-protection. And so that's another thing that I'm aware of as well. But look, I came and I did what I came to do. And I'm really happy that this book is a resource, hopefully to everyone. There's a lot of big picture lessons here, but certainly for the community that's impacted now or years from now, that if they want to figure out the truth, and also there's records of all different parts of the story that I'm hoping people can benefit from, and making that, you know, first draft of history available. I think when I was looking into some of the indigenous history of the region and just trying to assess basic facts about this area was immensely challenging, mostly because New Englanders, we have this wonderful tradition of telling our own histories, which I'm very much a part of. But in this case, there's really been a deliberate exclusion of the stories of indigenous people, down to, you know, putting a arsenal over a site that we would have more evidence of their existence, right? And I was reading one writer at that time, Daniel Gookin, who was an overseer of the converted Native communities. And he wrote that this passage after a war, King Philip's War, almost as, you know, if I don't write this down, I know this history will be lost. And he's citing documents that I think have been destroyed. And it's only now that that's become digitalized and also typed up so we can read it. And I definitely felt a kinship to that spirit, to this is what I know. I do think it's a story that I structured around my own life in a way that is to shape the narrative, you know, but also that this is an important history. It's an important time. And there it is.
Oh, all right. We have another question. Let's talk about During the investigation, how did Waltham police respond to you? And after this all came out, was there a different response? And also, I know in some cases, police departments have offered up apologies. Did any of this happen here?
The case is still officially open. And it really is, if you're looking at accountability, it's Middlesex County, right? So there is some confusion because there is overlap between Waltham Police Department and even Watertown because of the task force. But technically, this is a Middlesex DA case with overseen by Marion Ryan. And this is the same office that orchestrated an interview in which Ibrahim Tadashev, who was one of Tamerlan Tsarnaev's associates, who my book shows was behind the Waltham triple homicide. They led an interview in which he was shot dead by another member of law enforcement. So for years, they've said that this case is open and active, and that's why they can't make any comment on it. And it's disturbing. This case has also come up in the Jahar Tsarnaev's death penalty trial, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And when I say it came up, it didn't really come up because prosecutors really pushed to keep the Waltham story out of the trial. Because if there was evidence that Tamerlan had committed a homicide prior to the bombing, independently of Jahar, the defense would be able to use that in their death penalty argument to say, you know, Tamerlan was the ringleader and that Jahar did not deserve the death penalty. And so prosecutors actually discredited the theory that Tamerlan did it and continued to spread misinformation about the story all the way up to the Supreme Court. And that's part of why reporting on the story took so long. And there hasn't been that moment of accountability and reconciliation. And that's where my work as a journalist kind of ends, because I'm not an activist. You know, people can use this information and they can use it to vote, use it to ask authorities questions. But, you know, for me, you know, it's at least a lesson we can look at and learn from and ask, you know, is this okay to not have that accountability from members of law enforcement?
Think you'll ever know what happened in that room with Ibrahim Tadashev? I mean, basically, he confessed for Tamerlan, and then he threw a table, and then he got shot for throwing a table. So, it seemed all kind of like, it doesn't all add up. Certainly,
and it's the part where he throws the table definitely certainly adds up. That it adds up to his nature. Ooh. The part that's interesting is that the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office, an ADA, sent 3 members of law enforcement to confront a trained fighter, he's an MMA fighter, with a hair trigger temper about a triple homicide in his own home, with no arrest plan in place. And after Ibrahim Tadashev confessed, the ADA tells the men in the room, don't cuff him. So what do you think happens after they show him evidence and say that he's done for? Like, what do you think this man who recently just beat a man bloody, hospitalized him over a parking space dispute 2 weeks prior, what do you think he's going to do?
It's hard to say. I mean, he's going against a room full of people that have deadly.
Oh
deadly
no!
force.
I mean, this is he's a fighter to his core. I really, again and again, I spoke to people at the gym who said every gym has somebody like that. He was a great fighter. Like that was the sole, you know, focus of his life, and he has been in numerous violent conflicts when confronted like that. He's been confronted by men with no shoes on. You know, another one is out the door calling the ADA, trying to figure out what's going on. He's sitting there waiting, you know, for 45 minutes. Now, the story of the broomstick doesn't have any prints on it. You know, will I know what happened exactly? No. Is it likely that Ibrahim Tadashev would have attacked? Absolutely. Is the accountability question, why wasn't the Middlesex ADA more prepared? Yes. And so far, that question hasn't been looked at or examined. There's been multiple theories. and the theories are interesting, especially if you're thinking about a narrative of a book, right? The theories are very intriguing, but unfortunately, a lot of the times the theories distract from what we do know, the facts on the ground. And that, again, goes to why there hasn't been any accountability for this case, right? A lot of the attention has been soaked up into these theories, into questions that we may never know, rather than focusing on what we do.
So has your story with the Waltham murders, has that made it onto a podcast? And if you've heard any podcasts that might misrepresent it? It's true.
I started with This American Life was my first initial reporting. I'm sure there are other podcasts. I've seen them. I haven't listened to them. I think some podcasts cite my work pretty respectfully. I've done enough of an overview to say that I'm sure there are others that there's a lot of reporting on this case at large that is inaccurate, and that's very upsetting. But podcasts aren't, the main focus or the issue. I'd love to be on other podcasts. It's a lot kind of figuring out, now how do you promote your work? I'm much more interested in interviewing other people. And, now I am working on other stories, and it's a lot.
What are you working on?
When you don't have a personal connection and there's a shorter turnaround, it's really great.
Yeah, what are you working on now?
Well, I guess I can say, I'm covering a rape trial for the Irish Times, which is actually quite interesting, especially adhering to Irish media laws, which are different, especially in the way that trials are covered. And I will say that I did a little bit of reporting on the Jared Ravisa story, that man who went on a stabbing spree. So to be continued, and a few other things as well. But I'm really interested in just going to places and reporting on them. Journalism is the best job in the world. You get so many interesting invitations into people's lives, and these stories about crime. It's really important to get them right. They impact people's lives, and it's great to kind of use the tools and the insights that I gained from reporting on this book, the docuseries, and then apply that to other stories.
Well, it's really great to have been talking to you and to talking to such a old school journalist. Like that's just.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, journalism is great. I love being nitty gritty about the facts, and the sources. It's a pursuit and a hobby I think I would recommend to everybody, especially if you're trying to assess the truth about various events in your daily life. Check the sources.
Right. So everyone, here's the book, The Waltham Murders. It's available everywhere. Susan Zalkind is still touring and making appearances. So go see her, buy her book. It's a wonderful book, and it's really well written, and just the facts, man, just the facts.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And for the people that are watching the stream, you can come in for the open mic with the Zoom link. I'll gladly welcome you in. Otherwise, thank you for being here and listening, and see you in 2 weeks.